There is a mountain in western Tibet that has never been climbed, not because it is the tallest, not because no road exists, not because people lacked courage. It remains untouched because 4 separate religions all reach the same boundary. This peak rises 6,638 meters into the sky in one of the loneliest places on Earth. And the strangest part is this. In an age when almost every summit gets treated like a target, Mount Kailash still forces a different question. What if some places are not meant to be one at all? Picture the far west of the Tibetan plateau. The air is thin. The roads are long. The land looks stripped back to its bones. Brown ridges run into pale salt flats. Wind moves across open ground with nothing to stop it. Then, out of that wide emptiness, Kailash rises almost by itself, shaped so cleanly that even modern visitors stop and stare. It is not the highest mountain in Tibet. Far from it. Everest is much taller. Many Himalayan peaks are steeper, colder, and deadlier. If you only looked at altitude, Kailash would not sit at the top of any normal climbing list. And yet, its name carries more weight than peaks that tower above it. Part of that power comes from its setting. Mount Kailash stands in Ngari, a remote region of western Tibet, not far from the borders of India and Nepal. The area is hard to reach even now. For much of history, it was far harder. That remoteness helped preserve the mountain. But remoteness alone does not explain why nobody stands on the summit. The deeper reason begins with belief. Hindu traditions identify Kailash as the earthly home of Shiva and Parvati. For many Buddhists, the mountain is linked to Demchok, also known as Chakrasamvara, a deity tied to supreme bliss. In Jain tradition, the wider Kailash region is tied to the liberation of Rishabhadeva, the first Tirthankara. In Bon, the older spiritual tradition of Tibet, the mountain holds its own sacred place as a center of power in the landscape. That overlap is rare, very rare. Sacred places often belong to one story, one people, one line of memory. Kailash does not work like that. Different traditions, built in different centuries with different ideas about the universe, all looked at this one mountain and said, in their own way, this place is not ordinary. That is the first mystery, not a fake mystery, not something dressed up for drama, a real one. Why this mountain? Why did so many separate traditions gather their deepest meaning around the same peak? Even if you remove religion for a moment, Kailash still stands apart. Its profile is unusually symmetrical. From a distance, its faces can look almost carved. Dark bands run across lighter rock. Snow catches on the upper slopes. The shape can seem more like a symbol than a mountain. You do not need to believe in anything supernatural to understand why people felt something there. Then there is the water. The region around Kailash lies near the source areas of several major Asian rivers, including the Indus, the Sutlej, the Brahmaputra, and the Karnali. That matters more than it first sounds. These rivers help feed some of the most heavily peopled parts of Asia. For ancient societies, a landscape linked to the birth of so much water would never feel empty. It would feel charged. Close to the mountain lie 2 famous lakes. One is Lake Manasaravar, a high freshwater lake revered by pilgrims. The other is Rakshastal, a salt lake with a darker place in later myth. They sit side by side, almost like opposites, set into the same frame. One has long been linked with purity, the other with harsher stories. Even the geography here seems to invite meaning. And still, none of that fully answers the simplest question. If skilled climbers believed Kailash could be climbed, why did no one do it? Why did the age of modern mountaineering stop here? To understand that, you have to think about what climbing became in the last 2 centuries. Mountains were once barriers, then they became frontiers, then they became prizes. Maps filled in, empires sent us surveyors. Expeditions arrived with cameras, ropes, flags, and ambition. The summit, once useless, turned into proof. Proof of strength, proof of reach, proof that human will could rise above any line on Earth. That attitude reached almost every famous peak. The Alps were climbed, the Andes were climbed. The great mountains of the Himalayas became the final stage for national prestige and personal legend. Everest alone has been summited thousands of times. Records pile up, seasons come and go. Routes become industries. On many famous peaks, the idea of restraint barely survives. Kailash sits inside that same modern world, but somehow outside its rules. That is what makes it so powerful. It is not a mountain humans forgot. It is a mountain humans remembered too well. The first people who carried Kailash into wider modern records were not thrill seekers. They were explorers, surveyors, pilgrims, traders, monks, and local communities who had known the region long before outsiders treated mountains as objects to collect. By the early 20th century, Western expeditions had begun moving through parts of the greater Himalayan world, measuring, naming, and assessing what could be climbed. Kailash entered that gaze too. In the 1920s, British surveyor Hugh Rutledge traveled in the area. Accounts from that period suggest experienced mountaineers studied the mountain and considered possible approaches. Some faces looked severe, others seemed less impossible, but no major attempt followed. The mountain was seen, judged, than left alone. That choice matters. It tells you this was never just about physical danger. Climbers have tried harder peaks with worse odds. If a mountain looks difficult, that often attracts more attention, not less. Kailash created the opposite reaction. Ability met hesitation. Then came the wider age of Himalayan climbing. After Everest was first summited in 1953, the world entered a new era. Big peaks became stages for national pride and personal myth. Gear improved, knowledge improved, rescue systems improved, at least compared with earlier decades. If there had been a serious international push to summit Kailash in that era, it likely could have happened. Yet the push never truly formed. This is where Reinhold Messner enters the story, and he matters because he is not a symbol of caution. He is one of the greatest climbers in history. He climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen. He climbed all 14 of the world's peaks above 8,000 meters. He built a reputation on going where the line between possible and impossible felt thin. In the mid-1980s, Chinese authorities reportedly offered Messner permission to climb Mount Kailash. That single detail is astonishing. Imagine the moment. One of the strongest mountaineers alive is given a rare opening toward the world's most famous unclimbed sacred peak. This is the kind of setup that usually ends in headlines, sponsorships, and a summit bid built to echo through climbing history. Messner said no. He did not say no because Kailash was too hard. He did not say no because the logistics were hopeless. He did not say no because he doubted his own skill. He said no because he believed climbing the mountain would violate something deeper than sport. He later spoke in terms that were strikingly simple. Conquering that mountain, he suggested, would mean conquering something in people's souls. That sentence tells you almost everything. It cuts through the whole modern climbing instinct. Usually the summit is the point. Here, the summit was the problem. Even after that, the boundary was tested again. In 2001, plans for a Spanish team to attempt Kailash triggered international backlash. The reaction came fast. Religious leaders objected. Pilgrims objected. Mountaineers objected too. The pressure grew so strong that the permit was withdrawn and the attempt was stopped before it began. In the end, the most important defense of Kailash was not a cliff or a storm. It was collective refusal. Think about how unusual that is. Governments reverse many decisions for political reasons. But this case stands out because the reversal aligned with something larger than normal policy. China has allowed climbing on many peaks in Tibet. Mountaineering can bring money, attention, and prestige. Kailash remained an exception. That exception did not appear by accident. It exists because the mountain carries too much symbolic weight to be folded into ordinary adventure tourism. Even states that control access to land do not fully control what a sacred place means to millions of people. Kailash proved that. And yet the mountain is not closed in the way a military site is closed. People go there every year. Thousands of pilgrims arrive, often after long, expensive, physically punishing journeys. They come not to stand on top, but to circle the mountain's base in a ritual known as Kora. The outer Kora around Kailash is about 52 kilometers long. It is not a casual walk. Most of it sits at very high altitude. The air is thin enough to punish every step. Pilgrims cross Dol Mala, a pass over 500-600 meters high. Weather can turn quickly. Temperatures drop hard at night. For people not used to altitude, even tying a boot can feel like work. Still, they go. Elderly pilgrims go. Young pilgrims go. Some complete the route in a few days. Some move more slowly. Some perform full-body prostrations for the entire circuit. Imagine that. You stand. You raise your hands. You lie flat. You touch the ground. You rise. You take a small step forward. Then you do it again and again for days. That act changes the scale of the story. We often hear that Kailash was never climbed and the line lands like a mystery, but maybe the greater mystery is this. Why do so many people travel to suffer around a mountain they will never try to summit? Why does the path around the peak matter more than the peak itself? The answer begins in a completely different idea of what mountains are for. Modern climbing often treats a mountain like a problem. The summit is the answer. Pilgrimage treats the mountain like a presence. The point is not to defeat it. The point is to enter a relationship with it. That relationship shapes everything in Kailash. Hindu pilgrims traditionally move clockwise around the mountain. Bon practitioners traditionally move counterclockwise. The direction changes with the tradition, but the rule underneath remains the same. You do not go over the sacred center. You move around it. This is not avoidance born from fear. It is discipline born from meaning. And that difference matters. People who make the Kora are not staying away from Kailash. They are coming as close as devotion allows. The route itself carries layers of symbolism. At Dol Mala, many pilgrims see a passage through death and renewal. The climb up can feel brutal. The descent can feel like release. Nearby are prayer flags, offerings, old traces of grief and hope left by others. Personal stories gather there. Illness, loss, promises, thanks. Some people arrive asking for strength. Others arrive after surviving what they thought would break them. By the time you understand that, the idea of climbing the summit begins to look almost childish. Not evil, not even always disrespectful on purpose, just narrow. A summit is a dot on a map. Kailash is a whole spiritual landscape. That landscape extends beyond the mountain. Lake Manasarovar sits nearby at extreme altitude, one of the highest freshwater lakes in the world. Pilgrims often connect the lake and the mountain as parts of one sacred journey. Some bathe in its freezing water, some collect it, some sit on its shore and do almost nothing at all, because at that elevation even stillness feels earned. Next to it lies Rakshastal, Selene, and often linked in later stories with darker forces. The pairing feels almost too neat. Freshwater and salt, purity and danger, bright openness and severe emptiness. Nature did not design those meanings for us. People layered them onto the land. But once they are there, they are hard to peel away. This is where many shallow tellings of Kailash go wrong. They rush toward wild claims. They talk about hidden energy fields, impossible aging effects, ancient machines, alien geometry, secret entrances, forbidden powers. The internet loves that version because it is easy. It turns mystery into a cheap product. But the real story does not need that help. No credible scientific evidence shows Kailash is artificial. No solid evidence shows weird forces around the mountain stopping climbers. Its striking shape has geological explanations. The region's power in human imagination can be explained without inventing science fiction. And honestly, that makes the truth more interesting, not less. Because what is stranger than fiction here is not a hidden machine under the rocks. It is the fact that millions of human beings, across different eras and belief systems, gave up the summit on purpose. That does not happen often. Our species is very good at turning limits into dares. We cross deserts because they are there. We sail oceans because maps end. We fly higher because someone says not yet. When a place resists us, we usually increase the pressure. Kailash met that instinct and bent it. But here is where the story becomes even richer. The mountain is not only sacred because people said so, it also sits in a landscape whose physical features naturally pull human meaning toward it. Ancient cultures did not build their sacred geographies in blank space. They watched patterns. They followed rivers. They noticed forms. They marked what stood apart. The region around Kailash nourishes that instinct at every scale. The peak rises near the headwaters of major rivers. It stands beside important lakes. It catches the eye with an almost unnerving symmetry. It sits isolated enough to feel central. That last part sounds backward, but think about it. In a crowded landscape, nothing dominates for long. In open country, one mountain can become a whole axis for memory. Some traditions describe Kailash as the center of the world. Not in a modern map sense, in a symbolic sense, a place where vertical and horizontal meaning meet. Sky above, earth below, the human path circling between them. You can dismiss that as poetry if you want. But poetry is often what humans make when a place exceeds ordinary language. There's also the old Tibetan Buddhist legend of Milarepa and Naro Bonchong. In one version, the two spiritual rivals compete for authority over the mountain. The details vary across retellings, but the heart of the story is clear. Kailash is so important that traditions do not merely visit it, they narrate themselves around it. Milarepa is one of the most revered figures in Tibetan Buddhism, remembered not just as a saint, but as a poet, a teacher, and a transformed man. Bon carries its own older claim to the mountain. The story of contest does not erase that tension. It preserves it, and that preservation tells you something powerful. Shared sacred ground is not always smooth. It can hold rivalry and reverence at the same time. Even that tension still leads back to the same boundary. The summit stays untouched. Now imagine you are not a pilgrim, not a monk, not a climber. You're just a traveler arriving there for the first time. The road has been long. The altitude has probably given you a headache. Your lips are cracked. Your thoughts feel slow. Then the clouds shift and Kailash appears. The mountain is not huge in the way Everest is huge. It is huge in a different way. Clean, composed, self-contained. That first sight is part of the reason the place keeps pulling people back. Some visitors describe a calm they did not expect. Others describe unease. Others describe nothing dramatic at all, just an overwhelming sense that the mountain does not need them. That may be the sharpest truth of the place. Kailash feels complete without human triumph. And that runs straight against one of the strongest myths of the modern age. We are taught that reaching the top is always noble, that breaking barriers is always brave, that untouched places are invitations. But not every line on earth is asking for our footprint. For a lot of viewers, this is the point where the story turns. Because until now, Kailash can sound like a mountain protected by religion. Important, yes. Beautiful, yes. But still distant, still abstract. Then you realize the real force of the story is not religion alone. It is restraint. It is one of the rare places where restraint won. That may sound soft. It is not soft at all. Restraint is hardest when conquest is possible. Saying no to what you cannot do is easy. Saying no to what you can do is different. That is what makes Messner's refusal matter so much. And it is what made the backlash in 2001 so revealing. People did not defend Kailash because it was unclimbable. They defended it because it was climbable enough to tempt the wrong instinct. Let that sink in. The mountain is famous not because humans failed there, but because enough humans chose not to succeed. That is the emotional peak of the whole story. Not a storm, not a death count, not a final dash to a summit ridge, just a decision. Again and again, across decades, cultures, and systems of power, the same decision. Leave the top alone. And once you see that, other details start to glow differently. The Kora is no longer a substitute for climbing. It is the main event. The lakes are no longer background scenery. They are part of the sacred frame. The rivers are no longer trivia. They help explain why this landscape gathered myth, prayer, and memory in the first place. Even the mountain's geometry hits differently. Scientists can explain its structure through geology, and they do. Kailash belongs to the Trans-Himalayan region north of the main Himalayan crest. Its rock and uplift history differ from some higher peaks nearby. Erosion works on each mountain differently. Over immense spans of time, layers weather, lines sharpen, and forms emerge. Nature does not need intention to create symmetry, but knowing that does not make the shape less moving. If anything, it makes it stranger. Over millions of years, ordinary geological processes made a mountain that looks, to human eyes, almost ceremonial. A form that cultures could not ignore. A silhouette that seems to announce importance before anyone says a word. This is where wonder should replace fear. Kailash is not compelling because it hides a monster or a secret civilization. It is compelling because the real world, left to itself, produced a place that human beings keep reading as sacred. Science explains the stone. It does not cancel the feeling. And the feeling has consequences. Real ones. Permits change because of it. Journeys happen because of it. Families save for years because of it. Pilgrims risk altitude sickness because of it. Local economies depend on it. Borders tighten around it. Stories survive because of it. A mountain can shape policy, memory, identity, and movement without a single person ever planting a flag on top. Think about how rare that is now. We live in a time when almost every powerful landscape gets packaged. If it is beautiful, it becomes a destination. If it is dangerous, it becomes a challenge. If it is remote, someone sells access. The language follows a pattern. Discover it, unlock it, conquer it. Experience it before everyone else does. Kailash resists that grammar. It does attract tourism, yes. It appears in travel plans and documentaries. Roads and permits matter. But the core meaning of the place still refuses to become ordinary adventure marketing. Even many non-religious climbers accept that line. They may not share the beliefs. Still, they understand the boundary. That shared respect is one of the most important parts of the story. It would be easy to frame this as faith against reason, or monks against modernity, or tradition against freedom. But Kailash does not fit those lazy oppositions. Plenty of people who value exploration also value leaving sacred things alone. Plenty of people who love mountains also understand that a summit is not always the goal. In that sense, Kailash reveals a deeper truth about mountaineering itself. The best climbers do not just know how to go up, they know when not to. Skill without judgment is only appetite. And appetite is what the modern world often lacks control over. We want access to everything. We want the behind-the-scenes pass, the drone shot, the summit selfie, the secret viewpoint, the untouched corner. But if every sacred place becomes just another item on a list, then the list wins and the place loses. Kailash still stands against that. Not perfectly, not beyond politics, not frozen outside history, but enough. Enough to remain different. There's also something deeply human in the way the mountain gathers contradiction. Four faiths do not agree on everything there. Their stories differ, their sacred meanings differ, their rituals differ, the direction of circumambulation can differ, yet all four still create the same practical wall around the summit. In a divided world, that kind of agreement is astonishing. You could argue that Kailash is one of the few places where disagreement itself proves the point. If groups with separate scriptures, gods, teachers, and sacred histories all converge on the same physical boundary, that convergence becomes a fact of culture, not just a private belief. The mountain becomes protected by overlap, and overlap that may be the strongest protection any sacred place can have. One tradition can be ignored. Four are harder to brush aside. Millions are harder still. There's a lesson in that for how landscapes survive. Not every place can be preserved by law alone. Some survive because people attach meaning to them so deeply that exploitation starts to feel like desecration. Modern conservation often speaks in terms of biodiversity, habitat, and fragile ecosystems. Those matter. They matter a lot. But human reverence can protect a place too. That does not mean every sacred claim should automatically override every other use. The world is more complicated than that. People need land. States enforce borders. Roads get built. Tourism grows. Communities change. Nothing remains pure. But Kailash shows that reverence can still act as a real social force, not just an old story. It also shows that mystery does not always need solving. That may be the hardest idea here. We are trained to expect an answer at the end. Why is Kailash sacred to 4 religions? Because of geography, history, symbolism, and cultural layering. Why has nobody climbed it? Because religious reverence, public pressure, and shared restraint kept the summit off limits. Why does it feel so powerful? Because it combines striking physical form with centuries of lived meaning. Those are good answers, real answers. But they are not complete in the cold, mechanical way some people want. There is still a remainder, a residue, a human feeling that does not vanish when facts arrive. Why that mountain, of all mountains, carries this much gravity is partly explainable and partly experiential. You have to hold both. Maybe that is why the stories around Kailash survive so well. People are not just trying to understand a peak. They are trying to understand why some places refuse to become ordinary. Imagine again the pilgrim path. Boots on stone, breath short from altitude, prayer flags snapping in the wind, the mountain appearing, disappearing, then appearing again as the route curves. You're tired, maybe frightened, maybe peaceful, maybe both. At some point, the summit stops mattering. The circle becomes the meaning. That is the opposite of how many of us move through life. We race toward tops, promotions, records, bigger numbers, higher platforms. We assume the point is always above us. Kailash asks a different question. What if the true act is not ascent, but relation? Not taking the center, but honoring it from the edge? That question is not just religious. It is deeply modern. Because our age is full of technical ability and short on self-limitation. We can drill deeper, build bigger, extract faster, and move farther than any humans before us. The danger is that we begin to think ability itself is permission. Kailash quietly says no. No in the voice of pilgrims circling 52 kilometers through thin air. No in the voice of climbers who refuse glory. No in the voice of communities who treat the summit as a line not to cross. No in the memory of a canceled permit. No in the empty fact of a top that remains free of human feet. There is one more twist here, and it may be the strangest of all. Mountains usually become famous because of what happened on them. First descent, disaster, rescue, war, research. An expedition lost in a storm, a race between rivals. Kailash is famous because of what did not happen. No summit party, no success photo, no flag, no fixed rope line to the top, no guided queue inching upward, no branded gear ads built around the final push. The absence itself became the event. That absence gives the mountain unusual dignity. It also gives the rest of us a mirror. When we look at Kailash, we are not just looking at a sacred mountain. We are looking at a test of what kind of species we want to be, one that turns every horizon into a target, or one that sometimes recognizes a boundary and lets it stand. Of course, no boundary is guaranteed forever. The modern world presses hard. Politics shift, tourism grows, access changes. Technology makes difficult terrain easier each decade. A future controversy is always possible. Someone somewhere will always wonder if the summit can finally be taken. Curiosity does not sleep for long. But if that day ever comes, the debate will not really be about rope, ice, or route finding. It will be about value. What matters more? The old human urge to stand where no one stood before, or the rare human wisdom to leave one place untouched because too much meaning would be broken by the act. For now, Kailash still answers that debate without speaking. The summit remains empty, the path below remains full, and maybe that is the cleanest ending this story can offer. Not a solved mystery, not a perfect moral, just a mountain that exposed a possibility many people forget. Reverence can be stronger than ambition. Not always, not everywhere, but sometimes. In one remote corner of Western Tibet, that has been enough. So, when people ask why nobody is allowed to climb Mount Kailash, the answer is both simple and huge. It is not just because monks said no, not just because governments restricted permits, not just because the weather is harsh or the journey is hard. It is because too many people across too many traditions have agreed that the summit is the one part of the mountain humans do not need. That agreement has held longer than most empires, longer than most modern states, longer than most climbing reputations. And if you think about it, that may be more impressive than any first ascent could ever be. A man can stand on a summit for minutes. A shared act of restraint can last for centuries. That is why Kailash still matters. Not as a puzzle box, not as a conspiracy magnet, not as a challenge waiting for the boldest climber. It matters because it shows a different kind of greatness. A greatness built not on conquest, but on refusal. Not on ownership, but on respect. Not on the flag at the top, but on the empty space where the flag never went. And maybe that is why the mountain keeps haunting people long after they leave. Because once you know its story, you start seeing the absence everywhere. Every untouched summit in your mind. Every place we almost ruined and did not. Every moment when not doing the thing was the better act.